Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the second panel on the ecosystem of accountability. And I'm joined by three excellent guests that are going to be talking about holding government and industry to account. We have Shane Rattenbury, the ACT Minister for Climate Change, Regina Featherstone, the Senior Lawyer at Human Rights Law Centre, and Belinda Noble, the founder of CommsDeclare, an organisation holding corporate marketing and fossil fuel industries to account. The format for today is going to be, we're going to have a set piece from each of the panellists, 2 to 5 minutes of prepared remarks. I heard the very helpful dings, which means I won't have to do my high school debating impression. That sounds like it's going to be taken care for us. So if we could start with Shane Rattenbury, and I'm hoping that all panellists will address why accountability is a critical component of having robust climate policy and how their work contributes to that. So join me in welcoming Shane Rattenbury.
Well, thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. Yuma daro anuna daro anunuol. In traditional language, this means hello, this is Ngunnawal country, and I'm delighted to join this event and have a chance to speak about these really important issues, because we know accountability is important in politics. And the last two speakers we've just heard have so clearly underlined that. But it's especially important when it comes to climate politics, because of the influence of the fossil fuel industry. And for decades, we have seen the fossil fuel industry distort the debate, sow uncertainty, sow confusion, sow dodgy science, frankly. We've seen it from local levels right through the United Nations. And so the importance of accountability mechanisms is so critical in that context. For those of you who don't know me so well, my background prior to being in politics, I worked for Greenpeace for 10 years here in Australia and internationally, including making a visit to Kiribati, and I think to attend a Pacific Islands Forum. And if I can just underline the existential nature of the situation for Kiribati, if you've not been there, it's hard to fathom. But you fly into this place that never gets more than a metre above sea level. You're in a plane, you suddenly see this thin crescent of land from the air, and when you stand in the middle of Kiribati, you can literally see the ocean 100 metres either side of you. The best accountability mechanism we could put in place is to send a plane load of Australian parliamentarians to Kiribati and make them stand there at high tide. That would be accountability. Leave them there. Well, there's some good ones. It's all right. There are a few good ones. But with that background in activism and now in politics, I guess that's the perspective I wanted to offer on this question of accountability in the ecosystem today. And from my perspective, I wanted to emphasise two aspects of accountability. One is the role of the civil society, not-for-profit organisations, NGOs, activists, whatever label you put on it, the people who speak truth to power, who do the research, who present the alternative ideas and expose the hypocrisy. The other is, I do want to emphasise, and I'll come from a biased place, but for those, again, who know me, I've been in the ACT Assembly since 2008, and that entire time, the Greens have held the balance of power in a shared government with us and Labor. And the importance of minority government is incredibly important. I think we've all seen those circumstances where you've got a party that controls a parliament. It's a very different dynamic to when you've got a two-party government or where you've got a crossbench of some combination that actually are the ones who have to agree to things. It's hard work being a two-party government because literally everything has to be negotiated. But that's the very point. Everything has to be negotiated, and therefore you get scrutiny, you get accountability, you get fresh ideas being brought to the table. You don't just have things roll along as you might see in a single-party government. In the ACT, we've been enormously successful on our climate activity. We have legislated greenhouse gas targets that match the science. Our first one was 40% by 2020, off a 1990 baseline. We met and exceeded it. We're now 47% below 1990 levels on our greenhouse emissions. And that's because in the negotiations to form a government, we said there have to be legislated climate targets. And that became the deal, and then it happens. Similarly, we've now got our 100% renewable electricity supply. We've taken the decision to electrify the entire city and abolish the gas network. These are the sort of things that can happen in contested discussions. And so I offer those two particular emphases from my perspective and the things I've done as what I think are important. The role of civil society and minority governments.
Thanks very much, Shane, for that delightful image of parliamentarians going to witness the climate catastrophe firsthand. I think I've seen an installation artwork on that theme, and it didn't end well. So let's hope that we can do better than that. All right. Next, we'll hear from senior lawyer from the Human Rights Law Centre, Regina Featherstone. And yes, please feel free to come up or sit down either way. And then after the set pieces, we'll have a chat all down here.
Hi everyone.
Yeah, you're good.
Hi everyone. My name's Regina. I would like to acknowledge as well that we're meeting on unceded Aboriginal land, the land of the Ngunnawal people. I work at the Human Rights Law Centre in the Whistleblower Project. We're the first dedicated legal service to assisting whistleblowers speak up and, as Shane said, speak truth to power. That's such an important concept of what we're speaking about today because we're talking about integrity. And integrity involves having those morals and knowing what is right and wrong within yourself. And we don't have a lot of that in government at the moment. We don't have a lot of that in our private industry because we don't have a lot of that happening in our fossil fuel decisions that are currently leading Australian politics. We need individual whistleblowers who are close to the decisions, who are close to the science and are close to the actions in the fossil fuel industries to speak up about wrongdoing that's occurring, because we don't have any other accountability happening. We've heard today all of the science, we know all of the problems, and we also have all of the solutions, but we just aren't having that accountability. So we have this really unfair burden of integrity placed on our whistleblowers. It's a huge burden for them to bear, but that's why our legal service is trying to assist them to come forward, to tell what's happening, to speak truth to power, that's so they don't suffer reprisals. We have 2 whistleblowers facing prosecution at the moment. It has a hugely chilling effect. How are we meant to have people act with integrity, ask of whistleblowers to act with integrity and speak up when what they're facing is ruining their whole lives, ruining their marriages, ruining their financial situations, losing their jobs? So when we're speaking about the fossil fuel industry and then speaking about how whistleblowers play into that, they themselves are the key to climate justice in our program, in what we're trying to do. But most critically, what we're trying to do is help support people, help support whistleblowers who have the bravery and the courage to speak up. I'm happy with that.
Interesting work.
Thanks very much, Regina. And I mean, speaking as a journalist, we respect the important work that you do protecting whistleblowers and also the whistleblowers themselves as important sources for stories and recognise that is a burden on them, but they should also improve accountability by talking to The Guardian as frequently as possible. All right, lastly, we're going to hear from Belinda Noble, the founder of CommsDeclare. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So CommsDeclare tackles this from a slightly different angle, and that's the angle of communications and media, public relations, what we call the persuasion industries. And David Attenborough says that saving the planet is now a communications challenge. And just to give you a background in how we came to where we are with public relations and marketing and advertising, is that those industries grew up with the fossil fuel industry and with the tobacco industry and with the war industry. And the very father of public relations, Ivy Lee, cut his teeth by defending the Rockefeller family after their militia had gone in and massacred striking mining workers in Colorado 110 years ago. So he was the first person to issue a media release because he thought, it's unfair that journalists only cover, the workers' side. What about the company's point of view, And so this is the beginning of the legacy that we now live with today. CommsDeclare started about 4 years ago. And we tried to get people in the advertising industry to basically divest their talents from fossil fuel clients. We had around 10 agencies decline fossil fuel accounts, which is, yeah, great. However, it became increasingly obvious that, if one person drops an account, someone else picks it up, and in the decisive decade, it's nowhere near enough. So we started the Fossil Ad Ban campaign, which aims to have tobacco-style restrictions on fossil fuel ads and fossil fuel sponsorships, because I'm a very strong believer, having spent my career in media and comms, that only laws will stop the influence. So only laws will stop, paying the AFR journalists to go to a gas lobby conference. Only laws will stop, the gas lobby from giving $50,000 to the Australian. It's only going to be those sorts of things. And of course, the IPCC did recognise that Australia is uniquely influenced by fossil fuel narratives, including the media. Not The Guardian, of course, because they don't accept fossil fuel advertising. Thank you very much. So yeah, we are asking for bans. We are asking for bans at state, local, and federal level and also stopping fossil fuel sponsorships.
Thanks very much, Belinda. And now moving to panel discussion, if I might start with you, Shane. You gave some great examples in your speech about progress on climate in the ACT, where there is a minority government, there is a power-sharing government. But looking at the national media, the ACT often flies under the radar and doesn't attract a lot of the backlash that previous power-sharing parliaments like Julia Gillard the Greens government did at the federal level. So I wanted to ask, picking up from what Larissa said about balance of power in both houses of parliament at the federal level, do you think that a power-sharing parliament would work again at the federal level? And what do you think the ACT example shows about using minority government to improve accountability?
It's really interesting the way the Australian media talks about power-sharing governments, because we've had one quite often. The Liberal and National Party do it. Now, the funny part is they have an agreement that's secret. We actually don't know what's in their power-sharing agreement. In the ACT, we have a written agreement with the Labor Party, and it gets published online about 2 hours after it's signed after an election. And I think this is a much better way, because people actually know what the agenda is. They know what the deal is that we've done to form a government together. So I think that the transparency of that is actually quite important to start with. To have a successful two-party government, you do need two parties that want to work together. And I think what we see out of federal Labor a little bit is a reluctance to want to do that. It's quite an antagonistic relationship at the national level. So I think that's a key challenge to getting it to work. It's then also about finding that shared agenda. And probably one of the things that's helped us in the ACT is we don't have major resource extraction. I think about the challenges that my colleagues in Tasmania faced over the forests and trying to do a power sharing agreement with Labor. And I think nationally, getting Labor to commit to a fossil fuel phase out will be really challenging. So I think there are some barriers there as well.
Regina, you mentioned the chilling effect of having whistleblowers currently before the courts. A lot of those high-profile cases in the media at the moment involve national security, not climate. I wonder if we could talk about some of the stories in the media about climate that have come from whistleblowing or its importance, for example, in improving integrity in climate offsets, and how do you see whistleblowing taking a bigger role in terms of countering the climate crisis that we're in?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously those two examples, they're government examples. There's been so many environmental and climate-related whistleblowing, illegal logging. We had last year dead dolphins off the coast of WA that was found from an oil spill which hadn't been reported properly. So we do have examples of climate whistleblowers coming forward and making the public aware. That is the key, making the public aware, because how can we vote, how can we use our dollars as consumers if in a way that aligns with our own values if we don't have all of the information in doing that? The biggest problem, I think, with the chilling effect of those two prosecutions that I just mentioned before is that there is so much that we still don't know about. So we do have some examples of environmental wrongdoing, sure, but there's so many that won't come forward. If the other side is Santos or Woodside, it's just not worth going up against and speaking the truth of what's actually happening. It's very difficult as well because we don't have the right frameworks around understanding as well what are the tangible, what is actual tangible wrongdoing in terms of climate targets at the moment. We don't have those frameworks, so it's extremely challenging for climate scientists to blow the whistle on their organisations as well. So where that fits into the whole ecosystem of integrity is it's one small part of the life cycle. We need journalists, we need academics, and we need everybody else working together. But what we need is that the government actually offers sufficient protections that if somebody does blow the whistle, that one, they're not just harmed from it, but harmed because they've done that, but also so that they have enough support to actually do that. And that's what our service is trying to do. And we would love for more climate and environmental wrongdoing to be told. But the reality is, I can speak in my practice, when we have whistleblowers who actually tell us of really significant wrongdoing relating to the environment, where the other side is big business and government, they get scared. They're so terrified. In the first phone call, they may say, I don't want to go to jail. Like, that's what we're talking here. So it's a really, really onerous burden. That integrity is a really, really tough one to uphold when what you're facing is just too much.
Back to you, Belinda, and I forgot to say thank you for the plug for us not taking fossil fuel ads. The Guardian also doesn't accept gambling ads, and we're now seeing the same whack-a-mole problem with a socially harmful industry there, where, you know, unless it's blanket across the industry, it doesn't work. But I want to talk about building community campaigns in that, you know, legislative change like a ban on fossil fuel ads. That doesn't happen overnight. Like, how do you get ground up momentum from the grassroots in order to achieve an outcome like that?
Well, we're asking people, firstly, to write to their local politicians. And we started off with councils. So we had 16 councils come on board with one form of, one or another form of restriction. Some banned sponsorship, some banned fossil fuel advertising on their property. And we're hoping that the momentum from the councils would then go up to state and federal level. Fossil fuel advertising is not a hot button issue, I think it's fair to say. And when we go out on social media in particular and criticise fossil fuels, we get an incredible amount of pushback, not just from bots either. So it's we're kind of the pointy end, I think, of the movement, sort of the first movers in this particular space. So we're not expecting a huge groundswell, but we are getting progress. We've had a bill introduced in New South Wales. ACT already bans fossil fuel ads on light rail. We'd love to see that expanded to events and other infrastructure. And we're trying to make inroads federally, not just with a full ban, but also labelling, greenhouse gas labelling of products, health warning labels on gas products as an example.
Maybe fossil fuel advertising doesn't ignite people's ire because companies spend so much effort in pretending that they're really renewable energy companies rather than fossil fuel companies. How do you stop that problem of greenwashing of companies' external image giving a very different impression than where the actual profit of their business comes from? Yeah,
we're seeing that right now. So Shell Energy Australia is pitching its creative account, and they've pitched themselves as a renewable energy company despite having 2 gas facilities. Look, the ACCC is cutting down on greenwashing, which is great, and I think we've got a speaker from the ACCC soon. Ad Standards has a new code to tackle greenwashing. However, it falls way short of overseas rules. So we're seeing in Europe now they're introducing laws which stop any net zero claims based on carbon offsets and may stop any green or environmental claims that are not vetted before they're published. So a lot further than what we're doing here, where you can, even under this new code, you'll be able to make a claim based on future technologies such as carbon capture and storage, even though those technologies are far from proven. So yeah, it's improving, but greenwashing laws are still not strong enough. And even if they were as strong as the EU laws, it wouldn't stop the problem of influence of the fossil fuel industry through their soft power. It wouldn't stop sponsorships. It wouldn't stop Santos sponsoring the Wallabies. So we need stronger greenwashing laws, and we also need those other components as well.
And that's, if I might, Paul, the other side of that is the social licence that I think you're touching on. You know, that sponsorship of sport particularly is a powerful social licence builder for the fossil fuel sector. So there's a campaign running in Australia now to ban fossil fuel sponsorship of sports teams. You know, you get the kids down there and they're getting the jersey on and they've got Santos or whoever splashed across Woodside for the football teams and the like. So we've just brought a bill in the ACT to try and ban that sponsorship of fossil fuel sports. It's a private member's bill from my colleague Joe Clay. Both other parties so far have said no way, because they can't imagine a football team having to cover the jersey when they come to the ACT. But what they're doing is they're actually buying legitimacy through that sponsorship.
Thanks, and please do hop in. I'm directing questions to one panellist, but if you've got thoughts, please do, as Shane did, and jump in. Can I ask Shane? You did mention your work at Greenpeace before the ACT, entering the ACT Parliament. Can you give us a sort of day in the life of what that involved, and a comparison about being an external accountability mechanism as opposed to now being a member of a government? How does that compare?
I've actually never seen them that differently in one way, because at the end of the day, you're still trying to change minds. At Greenpeace as a campaigner, you're trying to put a better story, change the way the world works in various ways. And in politics, it's essentially the same thing. Different set of levers, obviously. And part of my decision to go to make the move across was seeing that there were levers that you can pull in politics that you can't pull in the NGO sector. And that was just something I was interested in. Doesn't mean it's everybody's course, but it's one I found really important. But I was really interested in something Regina said about making the public aware. And something that civil society does so powerfully is do that. In Greenpeace, we very much employed the old Quaker notion of bearing witness. And that is so important. I led an expedition to Antarctica chasing the Japanese whaling fleet and took a couple of ships down there. And when we were there, we successfully found them and filmed the whaling process for the first time. Put it on the satellite, sent it out to the world, and suddenly people understand the reality of what's going on. That notion of letting people see, getting the inside understanding, bearing witness is so incredibly important.
I want to come back to Regina to ask how you think the Albanese government is tracking on its promised integrity mechanisms and protecting whistleblowers.
I think the NAC's a good start. I think there's been a few, there has been some reform to our laws, but it just doesn't even nearly go far enough. We have so many complex whistleblower laws, so many overlapping bits and pieces, missing areas. It's so challenging to navigate. What we'd love to see is just total overhaul and law reform on that to make it more simple, easy to understand and accessible, because what we have now is a total mess. Just recently, the Human Rights Law Centre we just launched our design principles for a Whistleblower Protection Authority. Now, back in 2019, the Labor Party was very involved and supportive of a Whistleblower Protection Authority. So what we're speaking about is some sort of body that would assist whistleblowers through the process. Similarly, when you have the Fair Work Ombudsman for underpayments. We're looking for something like that for whistleblowers. There's great support, there's always from the crossbench, but we want to have that as well actually enacted, because right now the Human Rights Law Centre is the only legal service that provides assistance pro bono to whistleblowers. It's just not enough. The demand is way too high. So there's a lot more that the Albanese government can do, and we've presented those on a platter, and we're really looking for engagement with that.
Here's one for all of you, starting with Regina. I've seen some discussion of this idea recently about financial rewards for whistleblowers. Do you support that, and do you think that would be something that would improve climate integrity and accountability?
Yeah, so that's a system they have in the US, and it's hugely effective. And you have whistleblowers receiving millions of dollars if what they've alleged has been substantiated. I think absolutely some sort of reward system. I think even just not prosecuting and harming and punishing people is a start, let alone a reward. But yeah, I would love to see something like that and make it. No, we don't need to have an incentivization. We shouldn't have to for moral integrity. But when you're up against it and you're facing all the sorts of ramifications afterwards, yeah, I think that wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, in America you can get rich being a whistleblower,
Absolutely.
but here you get thrown in jail.
Yeah.
But, look, certainly in the advertising PR world, we've tried very hard to get people to come out and tell us what the briefs are from fossil fuel companies, so we know what their tactics are. No dice, no dice. People, they're too worried about their careers. Often, they're people are starting out at the beginning of their careers. They're not earning much. That's just not an option for them. So I don't know if a financial incentive would actually help there, but I think certainly a general attitude which would start with government on transparency and accountability would be really, really helpful.
I thought what Regina said about starting with some of the easy things, don't prosecute people and provide a decent set of lawyers, would be an excellent start, so that people don't have that fear. You know, at the moment, if you come forward, you're on your own to a large extent. It's a pretty lonely and frightening experience, as you were describing, and I think that some of those basic protections would be an excellent starting place.
Maybe funding legal aid so the Human Rights Law Centre's not the only people representing whistleblowers. I'm sure maybe you don't want competition, but
No, we'd be fine with more people doing this work as well.
Lovely. Belinda, we've heard from Regina an update about where the Albanese government is up to on integrity mechanisms in terms of whistleblowers. Can I get your perspective on how receptive they are to these ideas about restricting ads from fossil fuels and other socially harmful industries?
Yeah, not. No, they're doing gambling right now, and that's fair and proper. I think fossil fuels is a bit way into the future for them, but it doesn't have to be a ban either. I wrote an article in the Herald last year which said, "Where's the climate campaign? You know, where's the vision of a clean energy future from the government? You know, they advertise, extensively about all other sorts of issues. Why aren't they telling us about what the future is, making that social license? Because if you don't do that, if you just build the infrastructure, there's going to be a backlash. You have to bring people along, and we've seen that in communities in North and South New South Wales. So, there has to be a social license campaign along with the climate campaign, and a component of that, should be restrictions or greenhouse gas labelling or information on the damage that fossil fuels are doing, so we can do this enormous change management program to bring people along. And that, I think, is a priority as well.
Do you think we should have taxpayer-funded ads in the lead-up to the next election about what extending the life of coal plants in order to have nuclear in 20 years would do to the climate?
We actually awarded a prize to the Morrison government's, was it Making Positive Energy campaign, where they had farting cows and stuff like this, and talking about how they were helping Australia's sustainability efforts while doing all the damage that they were doing. So yeah, as long as it's not greenwashing, I think we should definitely have a proper campaign, not extending the coal, obviously.
It goes to an interesting point, though. So much of what people are motivated by is fear. and they don't know what the future is going to look like. And I do talkback radio pretty regularly about the transition to electrification in the ACT, and we get lots of people calling in with really practical questions. What does it mean? How am I going to afford it? What's it going to do to my energy bills? Where do I even find the right device? These are the sort of basic things. So there's definitely a role there for that positive side of it, because people they want to understand that their life won't be much worse. It'll actually be better. We've seen for example, on gas, we've seen the research come out on the effect that it has within the household on childhood asthma and these sort of things. They're the stories we need to tell, but unless you're into the issues and you spend the time researching, in our ordinary everyday lives, most people don't do that. So there's definitely a case to get out there and just actually share the stories, explain what it means.
But it's important that it comes from government as well, as to give it the legitimacy. And when they're not criticising fossil fuels, then that's a problem.
Good example of that, we partnered up with Choice, who is such a trusted brand, of course, and created a website where you can come on to find out how to electrify your home. And you put in your house and you get the details, and then it goes off through the Choice system to recommend devices to you that, these are the right ones for your house and here's how much you should pay for them. Really basic stuff, but it brings the trust into it that people want to see as well.
Now, Shane, I've already asked you to get out your crystal ball to say how you think a power sharing government might work at the federal level, but let's bring the crystal ball out again and look a little closer towards the federal budget, because we are expecting there to be a substantial energy transition focus in the budget. Do you think that the federal government is going to take its cues from the ACT in terms of incentives for electrification, or what else might we or should we be seeing in this term of Parliament as soon as possible?
On the positive side, I think the federal government is getting the bit between the teeth on this one a little bit. We are seeing the capacity investment scheme, which will bring a lot of new renewable energy and storage into the system, and each of the different states and territories is seeing a portion of that depending on their profile. Certainly as the ACT, we've received some money from the federal government to boost our electrification programs. So there are things happening. We're not seeing them on the scale and the pace that we need. And that's the real issue. We got $7.5 million from the feds to help electrify public housing, which is great. We're putting $30 million into it ourselves. Our budget's tiny compared to theirs. So, the federal government's got the power and the resources to speed this up a lot. So much of the work we've done in getting started on this in the ACT is just about creating the industry. We're trying to electrify all of our government buildings at the moment, and we've got no civil engineers that know how to do it. So we've had to create a program, and we've committed $300 million over the next 15 years to do it, and that's giving the industry confidence to do the training, do the research, get the staff, get the technology in from overseas, all the things. If you did that on a sort of federal scale, you start to, we create domestic industries, you do all those things. That's where I think the federal government could make a real difference by scaling up and doing it fast.
We were talking before about public information campaigns and the extent to which people are motivated by fear. Where I wanted to ask all of you, maybe starting with Belinda, there's a discussion going on at the federal level about donation caps and spending caps, how much can be spent trying to persuade people to vote one way or the other, and truth in political advertising laws. Do you think that measures like that would improve the quality of discourse around climate accountability, or do you think that the ad campaigns themselves are a form of accountability that shouldn't be limited by something like a spending cap?
There absolutely should be truth in political advertising laws and a spending cap, in my opinion. Facebook's the only winner out of the current regime, maybe YouTube. Look, there's so much misinformation around, and to see climate denial content coming from a range of political actors, let's say, that not necessarily government actors, but lobby groups and so forth, people like Advance and groups like Advance and the QRC, to see that anti-climate rhetoric and the also the astroturfing campaigns where they pretend to be community groups that are against renewables, as an example, as we've seen. If we don't stamp that out, then I think we've got a real big problem for democracy and for our elections, and that's been borne out, as we've seen in the States, and it will happen here if we're not careful.
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at what happened last year with the voice referendum, there's been so much information that's come forward since, and a lot of that has been pioneered by organisations like the Australia Institute in actually trying to dig behind and look at those donations. There should be caps. There needs to be greater transparency as to who is actually funding what. And so in our in the political sphere, I think one of the speakers earlier today said that we should only have government-funded elections, and I think that in the campaigning, I think that that's really critical. So absolutely supportive of that.
If we don't have those sort of restrictions, the consequence is that the wealthy and the vested interests drive the agenda. They're the ones who've got the money to do the lobbying, run the advertising, frankly, go to the swanky events where you have the conversations about what's important, all those kind of things. So we need those sort of restrictions, or we end up with a US-style system.
And just coming back to you, Regina, because I've invited most of you to reflect on how the government is going. Perhaps rather than just scrutiny on the government, I should also invite some scrutiny on the media. How do you think the media is going in terms of the treatment of whistleblowers? Do you think that the media has given sufficient attention to the need to protect whistleblowers? And do you think that the personal sacrifices that whistleblowers make is sufficiently vindicated by winning the media attention to important issues that they're hoping to garner?
I mean, we work very closely with a lot of journalists, including those at The Guardian. So there's a lot of amazing work that is done through collaboration between whistleblowers and journalists. The problem that can exist is sometimes that journalists have a different set of criteria that they're looking for when they're going to pursue a story. What we want is to protect the whistleblower in each incident, and there can be times when journalists need documents or they need things from the business or the organisation or the government department, and those demands place a really unfair expectation on the whistleblower and can put them in jeopardy. I think broadly the media is very supportive of whistleblowers because that's where they get a lot of their stories. What we did see, though, is, last year with David McBride, we saw a huge turning on him and this sort of narrative that came out when he was entering into his pleadings, that everybody was sort of having this weird moral judgment against him, and that was really propelled by the media saying that, well, he didn't, the reason he blew the whistle wasn't for the reason he really said. And I think that's a really interesting concept, to have the media turning and interrogating why somebody has blown the whistle and it didn't meet this moral nexus, yet the crux of that is that Australia has committed war crimes in Afghanistan, and yet the media very quickly turned on David McBride because of the prosecution's arguments that were put forward. And I think that's really interesting because the whistleblower is not the celebrity, is not themselves the story. And I think the media has to be careful of that. But at the same time, covering those stories is super important, and getting that balance right, it is for the media, but very, very happy with a lot of the relationships that we have with journalists.
Don't worry, I wasn't fishing for more compliments. I was inviting an unvarnished reflection on perhaps some of the media's failings as well. So no need to apologise for gloves off. That's good. Now these are quite long-term projects and problems that you're all trying to tackle, but I want to ask what the next month looks like, what the most immediate actions for each of you are, to give a better sense of your work. So what does the next month for the Human Rights Law Centre Whistleblower Project look like?
We're really, really pushing for the Whistleblower Protection Authority. That is sort of a constant for us. We're constantly trying to push disclosures forward for our clients. we're overrun with clients that we're trying to assist through their disclosure process, helping navigate the system safely, represent them in the way in court, constant with legal submissions and law reform, but quite critically, the Whistleblower Protection Authority is probably our number one goal.
And Belinda, what is the next month for CommsDeclare and the fossil ad ban look like?
I'm going to be focusing on the ACT. Joe Clay's bill has gone to committee, and we put in a submission on that. So doing anything we can to try and support that, and any other restrictions on fossil fuel sponsorships and as well in the ACT, plus the greenwashing rules. So the AANA, the advertising standards regulator, has got its new greenwashing rules open for comment right now. Closes on Friday if anyone wants to have a say. So yeah, trying to get people to write into that.
Is that, before we go to Shane, is that focus on the ACT because you see this jurisdiction as an important proof of concept as to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, so we've seen bans in Sydney, we've seen them Stockholm, Amsterdam, capital cities around the world. France has banned fossil fuel advertising, so I think if anyone can do it in Australia, it's going to be the ACT, so we'll see how we go. No pressure.
We are the Scandinavia of the South.
And Shane, what is the next month, or could be a little longer? I don't know. Don't you have an election to worry about coming up?
There is one later in the year, but there's a lot of work to do before that. Actually, in the next month, we're really finalising out what's called our integrated energy plan, and this is actually the roadmap that gets us from where we are to phasing out the fossil fuel gas network. We took the policy decision. Some households and businesses have already started transition over, but nobody else has actually done this. 22% of our emissions in the ACT come from the use of fossil fuel gas. For a long time, we were told and advertised extensively at us that fossil gas, or natural gas as they like to call it, was the cheap and clean alternative. And in the 1980s, it probably was. It seemed it at the time, that's what we were all being told. So we've got a big cultural issue to actually help our community understand why no longer they should do that. It wasn't that many years ago that the key energy company in town was offering subsidies and encouraging people to put gas in. So we've still got this big cultural job, as well as the practical side of how do we change over all these households and businesses, and what do you actually do with a gas network? How do you write it down economically? What do you do with the physical infrastructure? There's all these questions, and we're trying to map those out, and we're right at the end of that process before it goes to Cabinet in a few weeks' time.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the next month for you three. Perhaps we should ask for either a closing reflection or a call to action about what people in the audience or at home should be doing in the next little while to help each of these important accountability causes. So if we could start up this end with Regina, like what can people at home do, or what should people at home know?
I think a really critical thing is that, as I have sort of mentioned a couple of times, there are 2 whistleblowers who remain on trial. We're waiting for sentencing for David McBride, and we're waiting for judgment in Richard Boyle's case. I think providing that support and making sure the government can hear you and understand that that's not okay. I think the reality is that, nobody sets out to be a whistleblower, and anybody in this room could be a whistleblower, and it affects all of us. It's such a link to our accountability and to the needs that we have and understanding what's happening. So I think empowering yourselves with those stories and providing that support in the way that you can.
Mm-hmm. Belinda?
Very easy. Go to fossiladban.org and send an email to your local politicians. Thank you very much.
And my take would be, being a climate activist comes in many, many forms. Every person in this room has a different skill set to bring to the climate struggle, from the sort of the knitting nanas to rising tide and everybody in between. There's all sorts of ways to contribute. It's very much about sphere of influence. What's your skill set, and where can you execute it to make a positive contribution to the climate? Accountants can do it really effectively in that space. Changing banks, all those things that are small but powerful signals. I changed banks a long time ago to a bank that doesn't fund fossil fuels and a whole range of other things. You probably many in this room belong to it as well. But it's a surprisingly good feeling. Go out and do it if you haven't.
And super
Yes, that's another one.
It's just sitting there, and it's such a huge pool of savings. It's so important that that's ethically invested as well. I think that might be all we have time for, because we're not planning on opening to the floor. So I want to invite everyone to thank our three panellists, Shane Rattenbury, Regina Featherstone, and Belinda Noble.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. We love that we can make these videos free to watch, but they're not free to make. It's thanks to our generous supporters that we can keep making research and content that changes minds. So, if you like what we do, please consider giving to the Australia Institute so we can keep doing it. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au and click the donate button to see how your support can help fund high quality research that matters.